Each society in heaven reflects a single man. I have frequently been permitted to see that each society of heaven reflects a single man, and is in the likeness of a man. There was a society into which several had insinuated themselves who knew how to counterfeit angels of light. These were hypocrites. When these were being separated from the angels, I saw that the entire society appeared at first like a single indistinct body, then by degrees in a human form, but still indistinctly, and at last clearly as a man. Those that were in that man and made up the man were such as were in the good of that society. The others who were not in the man and did not make up the man were hypocrites. These were cast out and the former were retained, and thus a separation was effected. Hypocrites are such as talk well and also do well, but have regard to themselves in everything. They talk as angels do about the Lord, heaven, love, and heavenly life, and also act rightly, so that they may appear to be what they profess to be. But their thinking is different, they believe nothing, and they wish good to none but themselves. Their doing good is for the sake of self, or if for the sake of others it is only for the appearance, and thus still for the sake of self. I have also been permitted to see that an entire angelic society, where the Lord is visibly present, appears as a one in the human form. There appeared on high towards the east something like a cloud, from glowing white becoming red, and with little stars round about, which was descending, and as it gradually descended it became brighter, and at last appeared in a perfect human form. The little stars round about the cloud were angels, who so appeared by virtue of light from the Lord. It must be understood, that although all in a heavenly society when seen together as one appear in the likeness of a man, yet no one society is just such a man as another. Societies differ from one another like the faces of different individuals of the same family, for the reason given above, that is, they differ in accordance with the varieties of good in which they are, and which determines their form. The societies of the inmost or highest heaven, and in the center there, are those that appear in the most perfect and beautiful human form. It is worthy of mention that the greater the number in any society in heaven, and the more these make a one, the more perfect is its human form, for variety arranged in a heavenly form is what constitutes perfection, as has been shown above, and number gives variety. Moreover, every society of heaven increases in number daily, and as it increases it becomes more perfect. Thus not only the society becomes more perfect, but also heaven in general, because it is made up of societies. As heaven gains in perfection by increase of numbers, it is evident how mistaken those are who believe that heaven may be closed by becoming full, for the opposite is true, that it will never be closed, but is perfected by greater and greater fullness. Therefore, the angels desire nothing so much as to have new angel guests come to them. Each society, when it appears as one whole, is in the form of a man, for the reason that heaven as a whole has that form, as has been shown in the preceding chapter. Moreover, in the most perfect form, such as the form of heaven is, there is a likeness of the parts to the whole, and of lesser forms to the greatest. The lesser forms and parts of heaven are the societies of which it consists, which are also heavens in lesser form. This likeness is perpetual, because in the heavens the goods of all are from a single love, that is, from a single origin. The single love, which is the origin of the good of all in heaven, is love, to the Lord, from the Lord. It is from this that the entire heaven in general, each society less generally, and each angel in particular, is a likeness of the Lord, as has been shown above. Therefore every angel is in a complete human form. In the two preceding chapters it has been shown that heaven in its whole complex, and likewise each society in heaven, reflects a single man. From the sequence of reasons there set forth, it follows that this is equally true of each angel. As heaven is a man in largest form, and a society of heaven in a less form, so is an angel in least. For in the most perfect form, such as the form of heaven is, there is a likeness of the whole in the part and of the part in the whole. This is so for the reason that heaven is a common sharing, for it shares all it has with each one, and each one receives all he has from that sharing. Because an angel is thus a recipient, he is a heaven in least form, as shown above in its chapter, and a man also, so far as he receives heaven, is a recipient, a heaven, and an angel. This is thus described in the Apocalypse: he measured the wall of the holy Jerusalem, 144 cubits, the measure of a man, which is that of an angel. Jerusalem means here the Lord's church, and in a more eminent sense, heaven. The wall means truth, which is a defense against the assault of falsities and evils. 144 means all goods and truths in the complex. Measure means what a thing is. A man means one in whom are goods and truths in general and in particular, thus in whom is heaven. And as it is from this that an angel is a man, it is said, the measure of a man, which is that of an angel. This is the spiritual meaning of these words. Without that meaning, how could it be seen that the wall of the holy Jerusalem is the measure of a man, which is that of an angel? Let us now turn to experience. That angels are human forms, or men, has been seen by me 1,000 times. I have talked with them as man with man, sometimes with one, sometimes with many together, and I have seen nothing whatever in their form different from the human form, and have occasionally been surprised to find them such. And that this might not be said to be a delusion or a vision of fancy, I have been permitted to see angels when fully awake or in possession of all my bodily senses, and in a state of clear perception. And I have often told them that men in the Christian world are in such blind ignorance in regard to angels and spirits, as to believe them to be minds without form, even pure thoughts, of which they have no idea except as something ethereal in which there is some vitality. And as they thus ascribe to angels nothing human except a thinking faculty, they believe that having no eyes they do not see, having no ears they do not hear, and having no mouth or tongue they do not speak. To this the angels replied that they are aware that such a belief is held by many in the world, and is prevalent among the learned, and to their surprise, even among the clergy. The reason, they said, is that the learned, who were the leaders and who first concocted such an idea of angels and spirits, conceived of them from the sense conceptions of the external man, and those who think from these, and not from interior light and from the general idea implanted in everyone, must needs fabricate such notions, since the sense conceptions of the external man take in only what belongs to nature, and nothing above nature, thus nothing whatever of the spiritual world. From these leaders as guides, this falsity of thought about angels extended to others, who did not think from themselves, but adopted the thoughts of their leaders, and those who first take their thoughts from others, and make that thought their belief, and then view it with their own understanding, cannot easily recede from it, and are therefore in most cases satisfied with confirming it. The angel said, furthermore, that the simple in faith and heart have no such idea about angels, but think of them as the men of heaven, and for the reason that they have not extinguished by learning what is implanted in them from heaven, and have no conception of anything apart from form. This is why angels in churches, whether sculptured or painted, are always depicted as men. In respect to this insight from heaven, they said that it is the divine, flowing into such as are in the good of faith and life. From all my experience, which is now of many years, I am able to say and affirm that angels are holy men in form, having faces, eyes, ears, bodies, arms, hands, and feet, that they see and hear one another, and talk together, and in a word lack nothing whatever that belongs to men, except that they are not clothed in material bodies. I have seen them in their own light, which exceeds by many degrees the noonday light of the world, and in that light all their features could be seen more distinctly and clearly than the faces of men are seen on the earth. It has also been granted me to see an angel of the inmost heaven. He had a more radiant and resplendent face than the angels of the lower heavens. I observed him attentively, and he had a human form in all completeness. But it must be remembered that a man cannot see angels with his bodily eyes, but only with the eyes of the spirit within him, because his spirit is in the spiritual world, and all things of the body are in the natural world. Like sees like, from being like. Moreover, as the bodily organ of sight, which is the eye, is too gross, as everyone knows, to see even the smaller things of nature except through magnifying glasses, still less can it see what is above the sphere of nature, as all things in the spiritual world are. Nevertheless these things can be seen by man, when he has been withdrawn from the sight of the body, and the sight of his spirit has been opened, and this can be effected instantly, whenever it is the pleasure of the Lord that man should see these things, and in that case, man does not know but what he is seeing them with his bodily eyes. Thus were angels seen by Abraham, Lot, Manoah, and the prophets, and thus, too, the Lord was seen by the disciples after the resurrection, and in the same way angels have been seen by me. Because the prophets saw in this way they were called seers, and were said to have their eyes opened. And enabling them to see thus, was called opening their eyes, as with Elisha's servant, of whom we read, Elisha prayed and said, Jehovah, I pray thee open his eyes that he may see, and Jehovah opened the eyes of the young man and he saw, and behold the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire, round about Elisha. Good spirits, with whom I have spoken about this matter, have been deeply grieved at such ignorance in the church about the condition of heaven, and of spirits and angels, and in their displeasure they charged me to declare positively, that they are not formless minds, nor ethereal breaths, but are men in very form, and see, hear, and feel equally with those who are in this world. It is from the Lord's divine human that heaven as a whole and in parts reflects man. That it is from the Lord's divine human that heaven as a whole and in part reflects man, follows as a conclusion from all that has been stated and shown in the preceding chapters, namely, 1. That the God of heaven is the Lord. 2. It is the divine of the Lord that makes heaven. 3. Heaven consists of innumerable societies, and each society is a heaven in a smaller form, and each angel in the smallest form. 4. All heaven in the aggregate reflects a single man. 5. Each society in the heavens reflects a single man. 6. Therefore every angel is in a complete human form. All this leads to the conclusion that as it is the divine that makes heaven, heaven must be human in form. That this divine is the Lord's divine human can be seen still more clearly, because in a compendium, in what has been collected, brought together and collated from the Arcana Celestia and placed as a supplement at the end of this chapter. That the Lord's human is divine, and that it is not true that his human is not divine, as those within the Church believe, may also be seen in the same extracts, also in the chapter on the Lord, in the New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine, at the end. That this is true has been proved to me by much experience, about which something shall now be said. No angel in the heavens ever perceives the divine as being in any other than a human form, and what is remarkable, those in the higher heavens are unable to think of the divine in any other way. The necessity of thinking in this way comes from the divine itself that flows in, and also from the form of heaven in harmony with which their thoughts spread forth. For every thought of an angel spreads forth into heaven, and the angels have intelligence and wisdom in the measure of that extension. It is in consequence of this that all in heaven acknowledge the Lord, because only in him does the divine human exist. Not only have I been told all this by angels, but when elevated into the inner sphere of heaven I have been able to perceive it. From this it is evident that, the wiser the angels are, the more clearly they perceive this truth, and it is from this that the Lord is seen by them, for the Lord is seen in a divine angelic form, which is the human form, by those who acknowledge and believe in a visible divine being, but not by those who believe in an invisible divine. For the former can see their divine being, but the latter cannot. Because the angels have no perception of an invisible divine, which they call a divine devoid of form, but perceive only a visible divine in human form, they are accustomed to say that the Lord alone is man, and that it is from him that they are men, and that each one is a man in the measure of his reception of the Lord. By receiving the Lord they understand receiving good and truth which are from him, since the Lord is in his good and in his truth, and this they call wisdom and intelligence. Everyone knows, they say, that intelligence and wisdom make man, and not a face without these. The truth of this is made evident from the appearance of the angels of the interior heavens, for these, being in good and truth from the Lord and in consequent wisdom and intelligence, are in a most beautiful and most perfect human form, while the angels of the lower heavens are in human form of less perfection and beauty. On the other hand, those who are in hell appear in the light of heaven, hardly as men, but rather as monsters, since they are not in good and truth, but in evil and falsity, and consequently in the opposites of wisdom and intelligence. For this reason their life is not called life, but spiritual death. Because heaven as a whole and in part, from the Lord's divine human, reflects a man, the angels say that they are in the Lord, and some say that they are in his body, meaning that they are in the good of his love. And this the Lord himself teaches, saying, "Abide in me and I in you." As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, so neither can ye, except ye abide in me. For apart from me ye can do nothing. Abide in my love. If ye keep my commandments ye shall abide in my love. Because such a perception of the divine exists in the heavens, to think of God as in a human form is implanted in every man who receives any influx from heaven. Thus did the ancients think of him, and thus do the moderns think of him both outside of the church and within it. The simple see him in thought as the ancient one in shining light. But this insight has been extinguished in all those that by self-intelligence and by a life of evil have rejected influx from heaven. Those that have extinguished it by self-intelligence prefer an invisible God, while those that have extinguished it by a life of evil prefer no God. Neither of these are aware that such an insight exists, because they do not have it, and yet it is the divine heavenly itself that primarily flows into man out of heaven, because man is born for heaven, and no one without a conception of a divine can enter heaven. For this reason he that has no conception of heaven, that is, no conception of the divine from which heaven is, cannot be raised up to the first threshold of heaven. As soon as such a one draws near to heaven, a resistance and a strong repulsion are perceived, and for the reason that his interiors, which should be receptive of heaven, are closed up from their not being in the form of heaven, and the nearer he comes to heaven the more tightly are they closed up. Such is the lot of those within the church who deny the Lord, and of those who, like the Socinians, deny his divinity. But the lot of those who are born out of the church, and who are ignorant of the Lord because they do not have the word, will be described hereafter. That the men of old time had an idea of the divine as human, is evident from the manifestation of the divine to Abraham, Lot, Joshua, Gideon, Manoah and his wife, and others. These saw God as a man, but nevertheless adored him as the God of the universe, calling him the God of heaven and earth, and Jehovah. That it was the Lord who was seen by Abraham he himself teaches in John, and that it was he who was seen by the rest is evident from his words, "No one hath seen the Father, nor heard his voice, nor seen his form." But that God is man, can scarcely be comprehended by those who judge all things from the sense conceptions of the external man, for the sensual man must needs think of the divine from the world and what is therein, and thus of a divine and spiritual man in the same way as of a corporeal and natural man. From this he concludes that if God were a man, he would be as large as the universe, and if he ruled heaven and earth, it would be done through many others, after the manner of kings in the world. If told that in heaven there is no extension of space as in the world, he would not in the least comprehend it. For he that thinks only from nature and its light must needs think in accord with such extension as appears before his eyes. But it is the greatest mistake to think in this way about heaven. Extension there is not like extension in the world. In the world, extension is determinate, and thus measurable, but in heaven it is not determinate, and thus not measurable. But extension in heaven will be further treated of hereafter in connection with space and time in the spiritual world. Furthermore, everyone knows how far the sight of the eye extends, namely, to the sun and to the stars, which are so remote, and whoever thinks deeply knows that the internal sight, which is of thought, has a still wider extension, and that a yet more interior sight must extend more widely still. What then must be said of divine sight, which is the inmost and highest of all? Because thoughts have such extension, all things of heaven are shared with everyone there, so too are all things of the divine which makes heaven and fills it, as has been shown in the preceding chapters. Those in heaven wonder that men can believe themselves to be intelligent, who in thinking of God, think about something invisible, that is, inconceivable under any form, and that they can call those who think differently unintelligent and simple, when the reverse is the truth. They add, let those who thus believe themselves to be intelligent examine themselves, whether they do not look upon nature as God, some the nature that is before their eyes, others the invisible side of nature, and whether they are not so blind as not to know what God is, what an angel is, what a spirit is, what their soul is which is to live after death, what the life of heaven in man is, and many other things that constitute intelligence. When yet those whom they call simple know all these things in their way, having an idea of their God that he is the divine in a human form, of an angel that he is a heavenly man, of their soul that is to live after death that it is like an angel, and of the life of heaven in man that it is living in accord with the divine commandments. Such the angels call intelligent and fitted for heaven, but the others, on the other hand, they call not intelligent. Extracts from the Arcana Celestia relating to the Lord and his divine human. The divine was in the Lord from very conception. The Lord alone had a divine seed. His soul was Jehovah. Thus the Lord's inmost was the divine itself, while the clothing was from the mother. The divine itself was the being of the Lord's life, and from this the human afterwards went forth and became the outgo, existia, from that being Within the church where the word is and by it the Lord is known, the Lord's divine ought not to be denied, nor the holy that goes forth from him. Those within the church, who do not acknowledge the Lord, have no conjunction with the divine, but it is otherwise with those outside of the church. The essential of the church is to acknowledge the Lord's divine and his union with the Father. The glorification of the Lord is treated of in the word in many passages, and in the internal sense of the word everywhere. The Lord glorified his human, but not the divine, since this was glorified in itself. The Lord came into the world to glorify his human. The Lord glorified his human by means of the divine love that was in him from conception. The Lord's life in the world was his love towards the whole human race. The Lord's love transcends all human understanding. The Lord saved the human race by glorifying his human. Otherwise the whole human race would have perished in eternal death. The state of the Lord's glorification and humiliation. Glorification in respect to the Lord is the uniting of his human with the divine, and to glorify is to make divine. When the Lord glorified his human he put off everything human that was from the mother, until at last he was not her son. The Son of God from eternity was the divine truth in heaven. When the Lord was in the world, he made his human divine truth from the divine good that was in him. The Lord then arranged all things in himself into a heavenly form, which is in accord with divine truth. For this reason the Lord was called the Word, which is divine truth. The Lord alone had perception and thought from himself, and this was above all angelic perception and thought. The divine truth which was himself, the Lord united with divine good which was in himself. The union was reciprocal. In passing out of the world the Lord also made his human divine good. This is what is meant by his coming forth from the Father and returning to the Father. Thus he became one with the Father. Since that union divine truth goes forth from the Lord. How divine truth goes forth, illustrated. It was from his own power that the Lord united the human with the divine. From this it is clear that the Lord's human was not like the human of any other man, in that it was conceived from the divine itself. His union with the Father, from whom was his soul, was not as between two persons, but as between soul and body. The most ancient people could not worship the divine being, S, but could worship only the divine outgo, existere, which is the divine human, therefore the Lord came into the world in order to become the divine existere from the divine S. The ancients acknowledged the divine because he appeared to them in a human form, and this was the divine human. The infinite being, S, could flow into heaven with the angels and with men only by means of the divine human. In heaven no other divine than the divine human is perceived. The divine human from eternity was the divine truth in heaven, and the divine passing through heaven, thus it was the divine outgo, existere, which afterwards in the Lord became the divine being, S per se, from which is the divine existere in heaven. What the state of heaven was before the Lord's coming. The divine was not perceptible except when it passed through heaven. The inhabitants of all the earth worship the divine under a human form, that is, the Lord. They rejoice when they hear that God actually became man. All who are in good and who worship the divine under the human form are received by the Lord. God cannot be thought of except in human form, and what is incomprehensible does not fall into any idea, so neither into belief. Man is able to worship that of which he has some idea, but not that of which he has no idea. Therefore the divine is worshipped under a human form, by most of the inhabitants of the entire globe, and this is the effective influx from heaven. All who are in good in regard to their life, when they think of the Lord, think of the divine human, and not of the human separate from the divine. It is otherwise with those who are not in good in regard to their life. In the church at this day, those that are in evil in regard to their life, and those that are in faith separate from charity, think of the human of the Lord apart from the divine, and do not even comprehend what the divine human is, why they do not. The Lord's human is divine because it is from the being, S, of the Father, and this was his soul, illustrated by a father's likeness in children. Also because it was from the divine love, which was the very being, S, of his life from conception. Every man is such as his love is, and is his love. The Lord made all his human, both internal and external, divine. Therefore, differently from any man, he rose again as to his whole body. That the Lord's human is divine is acknowledged from his omnipresence in the Holy Supper. Also from his transfiguration before his 3 disciples. Also from the word of the Old Testament, in that he is called God, and is called Jehovah. In the sense of the letter, a distinction is made between the Father and the Son, that is, between Jehovah and the Lord, but not in the internal sense of the word, in which the angels of heaven are. In the Christian world the Lord's human has been declared not to be divine. This was done in a council for the Pope's sake, that he might be acknowledged as the Lord's vicar. Christians were examined in the other life in regard to their idea of one God, and it was found they held an idea of 3 gods. A divine trinity, or trine in one person, constituting one God, is conceivable, but not in 3 persons. A divine trine in the Lord is acknowledged in heaven. The trine in the Lord is the divine itself, called the Father, the divine human, called the Son, and the divine going forth, called the Holy Spirit, and this divine trine is a one. The Lord himself teaches that the Father and he are one, also that the Holy Divine goes forth from him and is his. The divine human flows into heaven and makes heaven. The Lord is the all in heaven and is the life of heaven. In the angels the Lord dwells in what is his own. Consequently those who are in heaven are in the Lord. The Lord's conjunction with angels is measured by their reception of the good of love and charity from him. The entire heaven has reference to the Lord. The Lord is the common center of heaven. All in heaven turn themselves to the Lord, who is above the heavens. Nevertheless angels do not turn themselves to the Lord, but the Lord turns them to himself. It is not a presence of angels with the Lord, but the Lord's presence with angels. In heaven there is no conjunction with the divine itself, but conjunction with the divine human. Heaven corresponds to the divine human of the Lord, consequently heaven in general is as a single man, and for this reason heaven is called the greatest man. The Lord is the only man, and those only are men who receive the divine from him. So far as they receive are they men and images of him. Therefore angels are forms of love and charity in human form, and this from the Lord. The whole heaven is the Lord's. He has all power in the heavens and on earth. As the Lord rules the whole heaven, he also rules all things depending thereon, thus all things in the world. The Lord alone has the power to remove the hells, to withhold from evils, and to hold in good, thus to save.